I found out during a casual Tuesday afternoon. My phone buzzed with a bank alert for our savings account, the one we'd built together for 15 years. The balance read zero. Not low. Not concerning.
Zero.
My hands went numb as I scrolled through the transaction history. 12 transfers over 6 months. Each one, thousands of dollars. Each one to an account I didn't recognize. I sat in my car in the parking lot and did what I should have done immediately. I called my lawyer. "Don't touch anything," Marcus said before I could even explain. "Don't confront him. Don't move money. Just send me the screenshots." His voice carried that particular calm that meant he'd seen worse. I wasn't sure that was comforting. I drove home in a fog, my mind separating into two parts, one that was breaking, one that was already calculating. I'd always been good at compartmentalizing. It had kept me functioning through my mother's illness, through Kevin's failed businesses, through 10 years of his increasingly distant silences. This would be no different, I told myself. I just had to get to the other side. Kevin was at work, which meant I had 3 hours. I went to his office, a spare bedroom that had become his sanctuary over the past year. He'd installed a lock last spring. I'd never asked him to remove it, which now felt like my first mistake. I had a key, though. We were married. I still had a key to every part of his life, or so I'd thought. The office was meticulously organized.
Too organized.
File folders labeled in his careful handwriting. I photographed everything, my hands steady even as my heart hammered. Documents. Bank statements. A deed to a property I'd never heard of. The more I found, the colder I became. Cold was useful. Cold was focused. By the time I heard his car in the driveway, I had answers to questions I hadn't asked yet. The property was in her name. The transfers had been systematic. And hidden in the back of a drawer, beneath old business cards, was a handwritten note in Kevin's handwriting. "Our new life starts when you're ready."
Our.
Not his and mine. His and someone else's. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it. I was still photographing the last document when I heard his key in the lock. "Hey," Kevin called out, setting his briefcase down. He looked tired. He always looked tired lately, though I now understood it wasn't from work stress. He came to the bedroom doorway and for a moment, his face shifted. He knew I'd been in there. "You're home early," he said, but it was a question disguised as an observation. I stood up, phone in hand, and met his eyes. "Bank alert came through," I said simply. "Our savings account. It's empty." I watched his face cycle through shock, calculation, and finally resignation. The resignation was what hurt most. It meant he'd already accepted what came next. "We should talk about this," he said, and there it was, the tone he'd perfected over months. Reasonable. Rational. The tone of someone who'd already mentally left. I'd spent 15 years learning to love this man, and I realized in that moment that I'd also spent the last year learning to watch him leave. The only difference now was that I could see it clearly. I walked past him without answering. I had a lawyer to call back and decisions to make. The talking was over. Marcus arranged for a forensic accountant within 48 hours. Her name was Patricia, and she had the kind of focused intensity that made me think she'd been born for this exact work. We met in Marcus's office, a glass-walled space in downtown Denver that smelled like expensive leather and coffee. "He's been systematically moving money," Patricia said, tapping her tablet. 12 transfers over 6 months, each one just under $10,000. I nodded. I'd already seen that. "But there's more," she continued.
"He sold something."
"Something valuable." "About 8 months ago." She pulled up a receipt. Our engagement ring. The diamond Kevin's parents had given me. He'd told me it was being cleaned. I didn't cry. I'd thought I would cry at some point, but I was still in the cold part. The compartmentalized part. "What else?" I asked. Patricia looked at Marcus, then back at me. "He's hidden assets. We need full discovery. Bank records, credit cards, any property in his name. We'll find it all, but it's going to take time." Time I had. Time Kevin didn't, though he didn't know that yet. I'd already decided I wasn't going to tell him I knew about the property, the lover, any of it. Let him think he was still ahead. The confrontation came on a Thursday. Kevin sat across from me at our kitchen table, and for the first time in our marriage, he looked small. Not physically smaller, but diminished somehow. Like a man realizing he'd made calculations that didn't add up. "I want a divorce," he said. The words were careful, rehearsed. "I've thought about this for months. I think we should try to keep things civil." Civil, as if civil was still on the table after what I'd found. "I agree," I said, and I watched his face adjust. He'd expected a fight. He'd prepared arguments. Instead, I gave him agreement, which was so much more frightening. "I have a lawyer," I continued. "His name is Marcus Chen. Here's his number." I slid a card across the table. Kevin stared at it like it might bite him. "You'll need representation," I said, keeping my voice level. "We're going to do this properly. Full financial discovery. Nothing hidden. Everything on the table." Something flickered in Kevin's eyes then, a moment of panic before he buried it. "I just want things to be fair," he said.
Fair. I almost laughed.
Instead, I stood up and left the room. I didn't need to say anything else. The case was already being built. Marcus filed the divorce petition on Friday morning. By Friday afternoon, we'd filed for an emergency hearing to freeze Kevin's assets, pending discovery. The judge, a woman named Rivera with a reputation for not tolerating financial deception, granted it immediately. I watched Kevin's face on the video call when his lawyer told him what had happened. The color drained from it. His lawyer, a young man who clearly hadn't expected this level of complexity, looked as confused as Kevin felt. "What grounds?" Kevin's lawyer asked. Marcus was calm. "Systematic transfer of marital assets, without disclosure. Hidden property acquisition. Sale of marital property. And," Marcus paused for effect, "discovery of a second bank account in the name of a third party that received regular deposits from the respondent's business account." The room went quiet. Kevin's lawyer was already making notes, his jaw tight. Within days, subpoenas went out to every bank, every property records office, every credit card company. Kevin had wanted to keep things simple. I was going to make sure he got exactly what he deserved, the full weight of transparency. What emerged over the next 3 weeks was a portrait of betrayal, so complete it almost felt clinical. The property wasn't just any property, it was a vacation home. Oceanfront. In North Carolina. Purchased 18 months ago in the name of Victoria Hartwell. Victoria, who worked in Kevin's office. Victoria, who I'd met at his company Christmas party 3 years ago and thought was nice. The purchase had been funded partially by the sale of items from her home. My grandmother's jewelry.
A painting ni de Inarita.
My engagement ring. Each item carefully liquidated and funneled through shell transactions to hide the trail. Patricia traced it all. She was methodical and precise, and her reports grew thicker each week. Kevin had opened a business account separate from the one I knew about. He'd taken out lines of credit I'd never seen. He'd even started moving his salary into accounts designed to hide income from tax purposes. It wasn't just infidelity. It was fraud. Financial fraud against his own wife. When Marcus told me the total amount, over $250,000, I felt something shift inside me. The cold had crystallized into something harder. Something that looked like determination. Kevin tried to settle. 6 weeks into the process, his lawyer came to Marcus with an offer. He'd keep the marital home and his retirement account. I'd get half the liquid assets. We'd split everything else. Clean break. Civil ending. Absolutely not, Marcus said, and I was grateful I didn't have to be the one to say it. We'd already found too much. Kevin had committed fraud. He'd hidden assets. He'd used our joint credit for personal benefit. Under Colorado law, that meant he wasn't entitled to the presumption of equal division. That meant I had leverage. That meant I was going to use it. I hired Patricia for additional work. I wanted to know everything. Every transaction. Every account. Every piece of property. If Kevin was going to fight this, he'd fight it on a field where I knew every inch of the terrain, and he was still fumbling in the dark. My therapist said I was being obsessive. I told her obsession was going to get me through this. She didn't argue, which I appreciated. I was learning who my allies were and who was just going to validate my pain instead of helping me rebuild. The turning point came when we found the offshore account. It was small, only about $40,000, but its existence changed everything. Marcus took it to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, "the respondent has attempted to hide assets in an international account, which represents a clear attempt to defraud the court and conceal marital property." The judge's face hardened. She ordered an immediate freeze on all of Kevin's assets pending trial. Suddenly, Kevin wasn't negotiating from a position of strength. He was negotiating from a position of survival. His lawyer called Marcus in a panic. Kevin wanted to talk. He wanted to cooperate. He wanted to avoid criminal charges for tax evasion and fraud. Suddenly, keeping the house and his retirement account didn't seem like such a priority anymore. I sat in Marcus's office and listened to him present the new offer. Kevin would sign over everything. The house, the retirement accounts, half ownership of his business, the North Carolina property, which we'd learned he'd already promised to Victoria, who was now very interested in how her name happened to be on a deed Kevin no longer had access to. In exchange, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges. I thought about it for exactly 3 hours. Then I told Marcus to tell Kevin's lawyer that I'd accept the offer, with one condition: Kevin would publicly acknowledge the divorce was due to his infidelity and financial deception. I wanted his professional reputation to reflect his choices. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's going to make him fight," he said. "Let him fight," I replied. "I have Patricia's reports. I have the accounts. I have the deed with his signature on it. I have screenshots of his bank transactions. I have evidence of fraud, tax evasion, and deliberate hiding of assets from his spouse. Let him fight all he wants." He didn't fight. 3 days later, his lawyer called. Kevin would sign the agreement. He would not publicly acknowledge anything. Marcus had pushed back on my additional condition, but he would sign away everything. The house, the business stake, the accounts, the property, all of it. In exchange for his freedom and my agreement not to pursue criminal charges, he got his personal possessions and the clothes in his closet. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. There was a difference, and I was going to spend the rest of my life remembering which was which. The finalization hearing took 2 hours. The judge reviewed Patricia's reports, examined the evidence of Kevin's deception, and awarded me 100% of the marital estate. Every penny, every property, everything. Kevin sat at his lawyer's table and looked at nothing. Victoria wasn't in the courtroom, but I'd heard through mutual friends that she'd stopped taking his calls. Turns out having your name on a deed to a property you can't access isn't quite as romantic as the idea of being someone's secret lover. Kevin walked out of the courthouse with nothing but his suit and the knowledge that his 20-year career in business was about to become significantly more complicated once word got out about the fraud charges his own lawyer was now advising him to consider reporting. I walked out with the house, the retirement accounts, his business stake, and the North Carolina property. I also walked out with something more valuable. I walked out knowing I could survive this. That I could stay focused when everything was falling apart. That I could build a strategy and execute it. That I could protect myself. As I stood on the courthouse steps in the Denver afternoon, I realized I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy.
Not yet.
But lighter. The divorce was final on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, I'd already made calls. The first was to a real estate agent. The North Carolina property sold within 6 weeks for more than Kevin had paid for it. Turns out oceanfront real estate holds value. The second call was to a business advisor. Kevin had left me with a stake in his company, a company that was about to become very interesting to look at, given that his financial practices were now under scrutiny. The third call was to an old friend from college who'd started her own financial consulting firm. "I need to learn about asset protection," I told her. "I need to make sure no one ever catches me off guard like this again." We met for coffee, and over the next month, she taught me things I should have known all along. How to structure finances so they're protected but transparent. How to verify what your spouse tells you about assets. How to recognize the signs of financial deception early. By the second month, I realized something. I could do this professionally. I could help other people navigate what I'd just survived. I had the knowledge. I had the experience. I had the motivation. I started making plans. 3 months after the divorce was final, I gave notice at my job. I'd spent 8 years in corporate finance, climbing a ladder I'd let Kevin convince me wasn't worth climbing anymore. Your job is fine, he'd said years ago, but my career needs the flexibility. I'd stepped back. I'd adjusted my hours. I'd been the one who worked around his schedule. I was done doing that. I rented a small office downtown and started my business, Hartwell Financial Protection. The irony of the name, Victoria Hartwell's name, really wasn't lost on me. But I wasn't going to run from it. I was going to own it. My first clients were friends. Women who'd realized their husbands had hidden accounts. Women who suspected their partners were being dishonest about finances. Women who'd been through divorces and wanted to protect themselves. I helped them trace assets. I helped them understand their financial situations. I helped them take back control. By the end of year 1, I had 12 clients. By the end of year 2, I had 40. By the end of year 3, I had a waiting list. I'd hired an associate. I'd opened a second office. I'd found something I was genuinely good at, something that mattered, something that was entirely mine. Kevin disappeared from my life almost completely after the divorce. His business eventually failed under the weight of audits and scrutiny from the IRS. Victoria moved back to her hometown in Iowa and started dating a dentist. I saw her mother at Whole Foods once, and we made brief eye contact before both looking away. None of that mattered to me anymore. What mattered was what I'd built. What mattered was that I owned my house free and clear. What mattered was that I'd turned my pain into purpose. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Kevin at a coffee shop. He looked diminished, tired, older than he should have. We exchanged pleasantries, the kind of formal courtesy between people who used to share everything and now shared nothing. I heard your business is doing well, he said. There was something in his voice, regret, maybe, or resignation. It is, I said simply. I didn't elaborate. I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore.
He was just someone I used to know.
He excused himself and left. I finished my coffee alone and went back to my office, where 3 clients were waiting. The life I'd built was waiting. That was enough. 5 years after the divorce, I stood in my new office, the third one, because the business had grown faster than I'd anticipated. The walls were lined with certifications, awards from financial planning associations, and photos from conferences where I'd spoken about protecting assets and recognizing financial abuse. I'd written a guide called Protecting Yourself, a woman's financial independence toolkit. It had sold 3,000 copies. I'd helped 78 women recover money their husbands had hidden. I'd helped them understand their finances. I'd given them back their power. My daughter, Emma, had graduated from college and was working as a financial analyst. She'd told me recently that she'd gone into the field because of me, because she'd watched me rebuild and rebuild again. You showed me what strength looked like, she'd said. I'd cried then, the kind of tears I hadn't allowed myself during the divorce. Those weren't tears of pain. Those were tears of gratitude for surviving it, for learning from it, for becoming something stronger on the other side. The final chapter of my story came when I received an envelope in the mail. Kevin's handwriting. Inside was a letter. He was getting remarried, he wrote, to a woman named Susan. He wanted me to know that he'd been in therapy for 3 years, that he'd worked hard to understand why he'd made the choices he'd made, and that he was sorry. He was sorry for the betrayal. He was sorry for the deception. He was sorry for taking from me without giving anything in return. I sat with that letter for a long time. I could have thrown it away. I could have felt nothing. Instead, I felt something close to pity for the man he'd been and gratitude that I wasn't married to him anymore. I wrote back a single sentence. I wish you well, Kevin. I hope you give Susan the honesty you couldn't give me. I mailed it and didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. My story wasn't about him anymore. It hadn't been for years. What I learned through all of this was that recovery doesn't look like winning. It looks like building. It looks like taking what broke you and understanding why it broke, and then using that knowledge to never be broken the same way twice. It looks like helping other people do the same. It looks like waking up one morning and realizing you've stopped thinking about the person who hurt you and started thinking about the person you want to become. I'd taken everything Kevin thought he owned, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. I'd protected myself because no one else would. I'd used the law, my intelligence, and my refusal to accept that this was how my story had to end. I'd transformed from a woman whose husband had stolen from her into a woman who'd stolen back her own life. That was the real victory. That was the thing worth building on. 10 years after walking out of that courthouse, I was invited to speak at a women's financial literacy conference. I talked about recognizing the signs of financial deception. I talked about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. I talked about the power of comprehensive documentation and the importance of knowing your own finances. Women lined up afterward to tell me their stories. A woman whose husband had hidden investments. A woman whose partner had open credit cards in her name. A woman who'd left an abusive relationship and needed help understanding what assets were actually hers. Then I saw her, standing at the back of the line, visibly nervous.
Victoria Harwell.
She'd cut her hair short and wore simple clothes, nothing like the polished professional I'd seen at Kevin's Christmas party years ago. When she reached the front, she didn't extend her hand. "I know you probably don't want to talk to me," she said quietly, "but I need help. And you're the only person who might understand." I stared at her for a long moment, feeling the weight of history between us. Then I handed her my card. "Call my office tomorrow," I said. "We'll schedule a consultation." Victoria came to my office 3 days later. She looked smaller in person than she had at the conference, like someone who'd spent years folding into herself. "I married Kevin," she said without preamble. 2 years after your divorce was finalized. We were together for 5 years. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind was racing. She continued, her voice shaking slightly. "He did the same thing to me that he did to you. Hidden accounts. Secret transfers. I found out he'd been seeing someone else for the last year of our marriage. A woman named Claire who works in real estate." She pulled out a folder and spread documents across my desk. Bank statements. Property records. Credit card bills. The pattern was identical to what he'd done to me. Systematic, calculated, deliberate. "The North Carolina property," she said. "The one he put in my name? He refinanced it without telling me. Took out $150,000 and gave it to Claire for a down payment on a condo in Arizona. When I confronted him, he told me I was crazy, that I was imagining things. But I'm not crazy." Her voice broke. "I just need someone to believe me." I believed her. Not because I was kind or forgiving, but because I recognized the pattern.
Kevin hadn't changed.
He'd just found new victims. "I need to know something," I said. "When you were with him during my marriage, did you know about the money he was stealing from me?" Victoria's face crumpled.
No.
"I swear I didn't know. He told me you two had already separated, that you were just finalizing paperwork, that the house was a gift from his parents for his new start. I was stupid, and I believed him because I wanted to." She wiped her eyes. "When I found out the truth after your divorce, I was horrified. But by then I was already invested. He'd convinced me you were vindictive, that you'd taken everything from him unfairly. He was so good at playing the victim." I nodded slowly. I'd heard that narrative before from mutual friends who'd believed his version of events. "What do you want from me?" I asked. Victoria looked at me directly for the first time. "I want to do what you did. I want to trace everything. I want to protect myself. And then I want to make sure he can't do this to anyone else." I took Victoria's case. Not as a client, but as a partner. We spent 3 months building her case with the same precision Patricia had used on mine years earlier. What we discovered was worse than either of us had imagined. Kevin hadn't just done this twice. He'd done it 4 times. For women over 20 years. Each one had trusted him. Each one had lost money. Each one had been gaslit into thinking they were overreacting or paranoid. The pattern was so consistent, it was almost mechanical. We found Claire, the real estate agent, and discovered she was already questioning things. We found a woman named Diane who dated Kevin before me and lost her inheritance to his investment opportunities. We found another woman, Jessica, who'd been engaged to him in his 20s and lost her savings to a business venture that never existed. Slowly, carefully, we built a network. 5 women who'd all been victimized by the same man using the same tactics. And together, we decided to do something about it. Not revenge. Something better. Something that would actually stop him. We filed a class action civil suit. 5 women against Kevin Hartwell for a pattern of fraud, financial abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Marcus handled the legal work. Patricia traced every dollar. Emma helped coordinate testimony. And Victoria and I stood together at the press conference. 2 women who'd been on opposite sides of betrayal now united by the recognition that we'd both been victims of the same predator. The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Kevin's lawyer tried to settle quietly. We're fused. This wasn't about money anymore. Most of us would never recover what we'd lost. This was about creating a public record. About making sure that when the next woman Googled his name, she'd find the truth. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Kevin sat at the defendant's table looking smaller each day as witness after witness testified to his pattern of deception. The jury found in our favor. The judge ordered him to pay restitution and, more importantly, issued a public condemnation of his conduct that would follow him forever. Kevin's ability to manipulate women through financial deception was over. Not because we'd destroyed him, but because we'd exposed him. Victoria and I became unlikely allies. She joined my firm 6 months after the trial, working specifically with women who'd been victimized by romantic partners. She understood that particular kind of betrayal in ways I couldn't. The way love could blind you to warning signs. The way someone could use your affection as a weapon. Together, we created a division of the business focused specifically on romantic financial fraud. We trained women to recognize red flags. We helped them conduct background checks on partners. We showed them how to protect assets before marriage, not after. The work was gratifying in ways I hadn't expected. Victoria was brilliant with clients, able to speak to their shame and guilt in ways that helped them move past it. I was the other woman, she'd tell them. I thought I was special. I thought he'd chosen me. And he stole from me anyway. This isn't about being smart or stupid. It's about predators who are very good at what they do. Her honesty was disarming. Women trusted her immediately. Our client base doubled within a year of her joining the firm. 15 years after my divorce and 5 years after the trial, I published a second book co-authored with Victoria. It was called The Pattern: How Financial Predators Choose Their Victims. We interviewed 30 women who'd been victimized by romantic partners. We documented the tactics predators used. We provided checklists and warning signs. We created a framework for protection. The book became required reading in several law schools and was recommended by the American Bar Association's Family Law Division. What surprised me most was the response from men. We received hundreds of letters from men who recognized the patterns in their own behavior, not predatory behavior, but enabling behavior. Men who'd let their partners handle all the finances without asking questions. Men who'd ignored red flags because confrontation was uncomfortable. Men who wanted to learn how to be better partners and protectors. The conversation had expanded beyond just helping victims. It had become about preventing victimization in the first place. That felt like real progress. That felt like something worth building on. 20 years after finding that zero balance in our savings account, Victoria and I stood together at a fundraiser for our nonprofit foundation. We'd created it 3 years earlier, funded by the restitution payments from the lawsuit and donations from former clients. The foundation provided free financial forensic services to women who couldn't afford them. We'd helped over 100 women trace hidden assets and protect themselves from financial abuse. Emma ran the foundation now, having left her corporate job to work full-time on what she called the family business of justice. I thought about Kevin sometimes, though he'd become almost abstract in my memory. A lesson learned rather than a person I'd loved. I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to Florida and was working in car sales. He was alone. Not because we destroyed him, but because he destroyed himself through choices he'd made repeatedly over decades. That wasn't my victory. My victory was standing in a room full of women who'd survived what I'd survived, who'd learned what I'd learned, who'd built what I'd built. Victoria touched my arm and smiled. "We did this," she said quietly. And she was right. Not just her and me, but all of us. Every woman who'd refused to be a victim. Every woman who'd chosen to build something better. That was the real ending. Not revenge. Not destruction. Just survival, transformation, and the choice to help others do the same. The story wasn't about what I'd taken from Kevin. It was about what I'd built from what he'd tried to take from me. And standing there, surrounded by evidence of that building, I finally felt complete.